How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm very, very good. I did see what you did. I'm glad you were able to take a joke, man. I called you the Donnie Brasco of the trans movement, and I'm glad you found it funny.
Well, I think it's of course I can take a joke because I'm the goat troll, as they say, but I think it's a very accurate analogy. I was basically a Trojan horse that I had an interview with Tristan Tate the day after I revealed on Alex Stein that this was all a social experiment. And on there, Tristan said, "You are basically like a mole that infiltrates a movement and then exposes it from the inside out." And so I think the Donnie Brasco analogy is apt.
Yeah, it was solid. Yeah, when I actually heard about you before Joe Rogan talked about you, and it was just a very interesting when I heard about you before you revealed, and I was like, this can't be real. Me and my buddy were looking at it. One of my best friends, we're like, this can't be real. It can't be. I'm like, this guy's too jacked. The tattoos are too nice. I'm like, you don't invest in tattoos like that and fitness like that, and then you're jumping into a dress. We were just like, this can't be real. But you went hard with it.
Well, what's scary is a lot of people can't tell the difference between slapstick comedy and a genuine movement. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's kind of the central problem with this movement is when the science and the laws in most of the states are based on self ID and self declaration for
Yeah.
what someone's sex is, there's going to be a lot of problems because then you do have jacked men with tattoos self identifying into women's spaces. And so I think I kind of brought out the fallacy in that and showed why it's very dangerous. So,
Yeah. Well, you revealed that, and I know that chapter may be done, or maybe you're still moving around with it. But I would like to just welcome you to the Black race because I saw that you were in a
thank you.
transracial type of
Yes.
journey. Like I said in my video, we're gonna have to bring your credit score down about 250 points. You're gonna have to hit
I
a nice 450. That gets you your N-word pass, and then you're good to go.
I totally understand. And I said when I did the blackface, since we're all for woman face and woman face is celebrated and super woke, obviously the same holds true for blackface because our race is just so much more fluid than our sex is. And so I'm actually going to apply for some jobs and I'm hoping affirmative action helps. And I will be saying the N word because if men can use women's restrooms, then a transracial man can say the N word. So I don't see a problem with it. And if you do, you're just a racist bigot.
Well, when I saw you in the do rag and everything, I was like, this guy checks out. I'm like I said, the
It's the
tattoos,
tattoos.
right? I was like, this guy kind of checks out. He's all right. I can see this guy doing pull ups in the yard with a bunch of
Yep.
guys.
Yep. Totally. Yeah, people always say you didn't go to law school, you have prison tattoos. So I always think that's funny. I think the tattoos just kind of add an extra layer to that. But yeah, I can totally, maybe I'll be like on a new season of Orange is the New Black or something. You never know.
Yeah, man. But what made you do this whole thing? The whole trans, jumping into that whole. What made you actually do that?
Well, I think like most people, man, I was just getting fed up with what I was seeing, which was just being peddled just patently false lies. If grown adults want to dress up in women's clothes, 30 years ago, we said they're cross dressers. No one cared. We might, take a second look if we saw them in public, but no one has ever said people aren't allowed or free to dress up in clothes of the opposite sex. But now they're telling us we have to actively participate in these delusions. We have to actively affirm these delusions that a man magically becomes a woman because he uttered a magical phrase. And it's that demanding our active participation in these delusions and in this kind of science fiction that really infuriated me. And again, it was do whatever you want, but don't tell me and don't tell my kids and don't tell my family that women and children need to actively participate in this. And then I was seeing commercials. I have nieces and nephews, they're 8 and 6 years old. And
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing Disney Plus, Disney Kids and YouTube Kids commercials that were incorporating this nonsense. And I saw one, it was a fish, and it was telling another fish, I'm not male or female, I'm non binary, which means I'm not a boy or a girl. And I just said, I can't believe 5 year olds are being confused with this propaganda. And so that was kind of the last straw. And so I just was cogitating on this stuff like everyone else has been for years. And I called up my buddy. I said, dude, I want to take on the trans movement. And that's where we came up with the idea to kind of be a Trojan horse and expose it.
Wow. Wow. Very interesting. You know, you're very right about the whole when you're talking about nieces and nephew, the movies and everything. You know, I have, you know, my baby's going to be 1 in about a week or so. And we decided that, you know, when it comes to music, we're having, you know, anytime we play music, it's like stuff from like the 60s and like 70s, stuff like that. You know, more upbeat stuff. We stay away from today's music. You know, we're staying away from today's movies because it's just so I don't know, man. We were in a bookstore looking for books for. There was a book called My Little Activist, like things of that nature. It was just so crazy. I reposted on Instagram and people were accusing me of photoshopping it because they're like, this can't be real, but it's very real. The type of stuff that they're teaching. And we read through some of these books and it's just basic propaganda on how to be an activist or how to, you know, destabilize the country that you live in. Basically, that's what it was.
Yeah, and I see Target books all the time. There was one I posted on X and it went viral and had a ton of shares. It was a book. I think it was called My Daddy's Pregnant, and it was said it was on the Target website marketed to 4 to 8 year olds. This stuff, it's just absolute garbage. It's propaganda, like you said. And again, if people want to dress up in clothing of the opposite sex, no one cares. But don't tell our children that men can magically become women and that it's okay. And with drag story hour and taking kids to drag shows, there's just this reprehensible need to bring children into it. And I absolutely despise and loathe that. And that's why I felt like I kind of had to take this movement on and make a mockery of it because it really is deserving of our derision. It doesn't deserve our respect. It shouldn't be celebrated. And basically, at the end of the day, man, I think it's just men that are trying to flaunt their sexual fetishes in public. And I think it's something that just needs to be kept private. So.
Yeah, yeah, that is definitely a thing. The thing is, and Rogan talks about this. So many people have touched on this where there could be people who are genuinely like that, but because you've made it this thing where you can't question it whatsoever, it gives way for those type of people to just infiltrate and step inside of this whole thing and be protected. And it's
What,
it's interesting, man.
when the science and the law of most of the states is self ID and only that person can articulate their identity, you are effectively opening the floodgates for any pervert, anyone with autogynephilia, anyone who wants to make a mockery of it or live out their sexual fetishes. You are opening the floodgates for them. And we're living with the real backlash and repercussions of that in women's sports, in women's reserve spaces. And it's just been an absolute disaster. So I really do hope people wake up because it's bad now. But imagine in 20 or 30 years what our kids are going to be growing up with. So
Yeah, very true. Very true. So when it comes to this whole thing, I would love to know what was the experience like for you out in public and online? What was the hate like? Did you receive any hate out in public? Was there hate online? I know there's some hate online. I mean, when we were going back and forth on Twitter, there was somebody who just kept on posting these hateful messages. I was ignoring them and you were too, but I was like, wow, I'm like, this person's just going off for no reason at all.
yeah, so in public, actually, because I'm not a sexual pervert and a predator like most of these people, I would wear a heavy coat with a hood, and the coat would go down to my knees so that whatever dress I was wearing was not showing. Because I filmed a lot of these in public spaces, so there were kids around, and I didn't
Yeah.
want them to see this abomination. So the videos were very short, usually 15 to 35 seconds long. So I didn't get much of a reaction because I was covered up most of the time. Occasionally there'd be people, looking because, like most trans people, I'm a man in women's clothes. So people are going to look. And then online, the reaction was split. It was ironically a lot of trans people saying, "You're not real trans, you're fake." And of course, to that, as Joe Rogan said, I would respond, "So I'm a fake faker, I'm a pretend faker." At the end of the day, all trans women are fake women. We're all cosplaying and putting on costumes and pretending to be women when we're not. And so I thought that was kind of funny. And so all of the accusations they would lodge at me about what I was doing and how wrong it is. And, oh, you're just mentally ill, or you're just faking it, or this is just a fetish. I would say, correct. All trans women are just mentally ill. All trans women are just faking it. All trans women are just men with a fetish. And so I think a lot of their accusations were true, but they're applicable to all of them, to the whole movement. And they are so narrow minded that they thought they only applied oops, sorry, that they only applied to me. And so, yeah, it's just interesting the kind of how tone deaf they are and how they don't understand that that's exactly what I was trying to prove is that this movement is open season for any mentally ill man that wants to, be a weirdo, and we shouldn't be forced to participate in it.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I figured there'd be a lot of hate. That's how it usually is. The side of tolerance is usually very intolerant at their convenience, it seems.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised by that at all. Now tell me something. Was there any love from the trans community at all?
Yeah, there was a lot of people, and this is their number one. I've noticed criticism of me. I see hundreds of thousands of posts about this and articles saying, we were kind and supportive to Josh. We were kind and compassionate to Josh. And that's true. They were kind and compassionate to a man wearing a costume, claiming he was a woman, and going into women's spaces. And there is nothing noble or dignified about being kind and compassionate to men that are doing that. And so my response is always, thank you for proving my point. You were kind and compassionate to a man pretending to be a woman, and that is the problem. That's what I'm trying to show, is that this is dangerous and it leads to societal problems. And so, yes, many of them were very, kind and compassionate, and I think that's a vice. I think that's a folly, and I think it's horrible. It'd be like being kind and compassionate to a schizophrenic man that's going into places he doesn't belong and allowing him to do that. It's not kind and compassionate and noble to allow people to run roughshod over other people in an attempt to appease their delusions. And so I think the truly kind and compassionate thing to do with mentally ill people is to treat the mental illness, not indulge the delusions. It wouldn't be kind and compassionate, right, to tell an anorexic person, yes, you are fat at 80 pounds, get liposuction. It wouldn't be kind and compassionate to tell a schizophrenic person, yes, the CIA is chasing you, here's a gun. It wouldn't be kind and compassionate to tell someone with body dysmorphia, yes, your nose is too large, you should start chopping it off. This is
That's
not a
very
noble
true.
approach. The kind and compassionate thing to do with all of these thought disorders, and gender dysphoria is a thought disorder under the DSM-5, the kind and compassionate thing is to treat it with cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is the only truly kind and compassionate thing we can do.
Wow. Wow. So you have thought this through. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people, I did see, because I was looking into you a little bit, I did see there were some people talking about you being ill or this or that. And I was like, huh. I'm like, I wonder. I'm like, we'll see. I'm like, I'll be able to tell pretty quickly. But it seems like you've thought this out quite a bit. And like I said in the video, this is like Matt Walsh level trolling here. Like, I would love to see you and Matt Walsh actually collab on something one day. I think you guys could make something really incredible,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. I mean, what is a woman? I mean, he asked a lot of questions about that. I think I kind of lived it and demonstrated it. And he just came out with Am I Racist, which
Mhm.
basically is a racial version of what
Yeah,
I did. I mean, he wasn't dressed up in blackface, but he's going undercover for a long period of time and pretending to be a woke idiot. And so I actually want to watch that movie. It looks very interesting and kind of reminds me of the stunt that I did.
oh, it's wild. It's wild. At one point he gets this woman who is like known in that community of, she wrote a White Fragility, a book, and he got her to give his producer, who's black, $50 out of her pocket as reparations. And she did it, and it's a golden moment in the movie. Seriously.
We literally live in a clown world, and it's just everyone is trying to virtue signal, and that's what's wrong with the trans movement is people have bent over backwards, and we have gone through these insane mental gymnastics to appease these people, and it's beyond just appeasing. We're basically sycophants for them, and whatever they ask, we always have to oblige. And it's all an attempt to just virtue signal, say, hey, look, I'm a good, decent person. And it comes at the expense of these people who are mentally ill. If we truly cared about these people, again, we would treat them with cognitive behavioral therapy and we would disabuse them of their delusions. But instead, we're entertaining and affirming false beliefs simply so that we look noble. And again, there's nothing kind and compassionate about that. I think it's despicable, and it just shows what a bunch of losers the woke movement is.
I think there is a, I don't know if you ever heard of the book Rules for Radicals. It's by someone named
I haven't.
Saul Alinsky. You should really look into that. It is a playbook for everything you see happening on the left. And one thing that they do, Obama was something called a community organizer. Hillary Clinton considers this man who wrote the book a mentor. And one thing that they do is they always infiltrate movements. And if you look at the way that this community is operating, there's a lot of people in it that are using that playbook. And one of the things that they do is they make demands, and no matter what, you cannot satiate the demands. So if they keep making demands, and even if you say yes, which you won't because their demands will get that ridiculous, but even if you say yes to everything, they'll make more demands still. And you can see that happening on the left. You can see with everything that they request, from what you're talking about to an idea like reparations. Like, they ask these ideas that cannot be actually fulfilled. They cannot be done. And it's that's why, like, they keep on gathering people. That's like one of the things they do. That's why I say community organizer, because they gather up the poor, they gather up the minorities, they gather up the LGBT people, they gather them all up, so they actually become this weird majority. And that's how they actually take power. Because if you look at that movement, and if you look at, something like BLM, you look at all these movements, really, what are they going for at the end of it? Like, it seems like it's power at the end of it. It seems like they're just pushing for more and more power. You see it happen in Canada. Canada, actually, because of Justin Trudeau, they have a law, and it was passed, that if you assemble a protest near somebody in your community, I'll say, because you're the poster boy for that community now. But if you make them upset, or if they feel threatened, you can be fined $25,000 and possible jail time. And of course, the protest has to disperse. But what is that really? Is that really placating to that person in that community? Or is that just a play for power? You're not allowed to assemble and make people uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at the core of a lot of these movements, it's power. You
Well,
see
and
it over and over again.
I think a manifestation of that, or a symptom of it, is you just look at the chilling effect on free speech. And that shows you that
That
it's
too.
a power grab, because if people are afraid to speak, like they have been in Canada, Australia, where the trans movement
Yep.
is big, New Zealand, Great Britain, where people are getting censored for posting things on Facebook. If you look, there's a huge chill on free speech, and that is a major symptom and indication of a consolidation of power. And so we really have seen that, especially since the Biden administration has taken over in the last 4 years. People are afraid to talk. They're afraid to have a dialogue because power has been so consolidated. And if you do anything that goes against the orthodoxy or the official narrative, you're going to get in trouble, and you're going to get silenced, or you're just going to get basically become a pariah and be ostracized from your friends group, your career, everything else. And so that's why I did what I did. I wanted to reopen a dialogue. I wanted to get a conversation going, because when you're making a claim that men magically become women because of gender identity issues, people should be able to question that. They should be able to say, hey, actually, that's a man. That is not a woman. And I think especially women should be able to speak out about this and say, we don't feel comfortable with this, especially since consent, as the left has been saying for decades, is such a big thing. Well, let's truly start listening to women and what they're saying. So that's why I did what I did, because there has been just such a chilling effect on free speech and dialogue. I just wanted to open up a conversation. And that's why even after my troll, I continue to go on podcasts and to post about this to hopefully keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, what you said about women, that is the most I don't know. Yeah, I guess chilling thing you can really see when they start speaking up and they start getting batted down because they are uncomfortable. I think Riley Gaines is a big example of that.
Yes.
When she was on Rogan, she was talking about how, there was a lot of her teammates were scared and they actually wanted to vote against this person being in their ranks. But then the person got to give a speech, again, power. They got to give a speech and they got to say that there'll be blood on your hands if this happens, like if you don't allow me in. And then the people who were going to say no actually ended up voting yes, because instead of doing it secretly, they did it in front of everybody, where you had to actually raise your hand and be that person that is a bigot and all these terrible things that come along with this. I found that to be very, very it's a hard thing, especially if you have daughters. That's a hard thing to have to go through, that your daughter is not able to speak up. That's
Well,
the
and
thing.
there's so much emotional blackmail going on, right?
Yes,
Oh, if you're
yes,
not kind and compassionate, they'll unalive themselves. Oh, if you don't
yes.
say that a man is a woman, then young kids are going to harm themselves. Or it's never winning the hearts and minds of people through a discussion or a dialectic that the left wins people over. It's always through emotional blackmail and threats. And they do it openly. And I think that's really sad, that you have to gain converts through emotional blackmail and outright threats. If you don't do it, then this will happen. And I think the Riley Gaines example just kind of draws that out. And that's why they go for kids. You never see them doing Drake's Story Hour at old folks' homes. They're always trying to get to the kids. And that goes to your point of they're always trying to win converts. So if they have to do it by threatening adults and brainwashing little kids, they're going to do it because they can't do it on the merits. They can't do it with a debate or a conversation about whether men can magically become women, because they know they'll lose. So they resort to these tactics. And it's not just in the trans issue and gender ideology. The left and the woke mob does this with a host of issues, whether it's BLM and race. They always resort to emotional blackmail and threats. And I think that's an indictment on the lack of merit to and credibility that they have with their arguments.
That's why I think you'll find the book Rules for Radicals. It's by someone named Saul Alinsky. You'll find it very interesting. It really paints everything that's happening, and it goes through all groups. That's the thing, that you just brought up race as well. It goes through everything, because that is
That's
the
interesting.
playbook. Yeah, it's a really interesting book. My friend told me about it years ago. And as you watch the landscape of the left and what they're doing, you start to understand exactly what they're doing. And everything is just a play for power. Nothing is the thing, whether it's
Right.
whether they're talking about the weather, or they're talking about race, or they're talking about like whatever it is, it's always a play for power. That's all it ever is. And they're just trying to acquire more and more power. And like you said, as they gain the power, what ends up happening is the chilling of free speech.
Yep.
Everything results in them gaining more power and you gaining more censorship, like over and over and over again. It's very interesting, the book, man. You'll love it.
I feel like it's going to really infuriate me, but I want to read it. And I think if people just sit there and think, man, what was I allowed to say 30 years ago? And let me compare that against what I'm allowed to say now. You really have to step back and say that to go, oh my God, the window of free speech has been so curtailed, so narrowed in the last few decades, but we're so used to it and so in the forests or in the woods, I guess, that it's hard to see it, but it really has. Our window of free speech has really been narrowed, and like you said, it's not as bad here as it is in Great Britain or Canada or Australia, but it's getting really bad, and it's sad that it's all a power play. And same with corporations. There's the adage that corporations, they're no different than people on the right. They just say things and then they say hashtag BLM or hashtag gay rights. Like, they don't care about these groups. They're just using them as a hashtag to virtue signal so that they can get more money and gain more power. And so it's both politicians, corporations, the pharmaceutical industry, the medical community. They are all piggybacking off of the backs of these marginalized groups, and they're using them to make money and consolidate power. And it's really despicable.
How old are you?
I'm 37.
Okay, so then I'm 38. Well, you probably remember back in like the 90s. You're talking about what you can say versus what you can't say now. Back in the 90s, it was just open. You could
Yeah.
say what you wanted to say. Especially, I have older brothers, so like early 90s for me, it was wild. Everybody was Archie Bunker back then.
Well, in the left, of course, the left would, lodge criticisms against that and say, but that wasn't good. How many people unalived themselves, or how many people went through mental torture because we were allowed to bully and say whatever we want? And there is some validity to some of those claims, but the pendulum can swing too far in the other direction. No one would argue that we shouldn't be allowed to just have hate speech or bully people to the point of unaliving themselves, but the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that people literally can't say truth or reality, and language doesn't even mean what it used to. Where man means woman, and woman means man, and right means wrong, and wrong means up is down, down is up. It's so Orwellian. Language really has lost all meaning, and so I just think it's really scary. I think the pendulum swung way too far in the other direction, and I think we need to consider both. Maybe we shouldn't bully people, and we shouldn't, have unfettered speech like hate speech or things like that. But you can't just censor things that you don't like. And with Mark Zuckerberg's interview on Joe Rogan, we saw him talking about where Biden's administration didn't just want to censor satire, they wanted to censor true facts about side effects of the vaccine. And so now we have true facts being censored by the government. And I think it's really Orwellian and really scary.
If we go back to what you're talking about in terms of what you can say and what you can't say back in the 90s, people weren't, doing anything to themselves because of it. Everybody had a thicker skin. And in fact, if you really look back, like I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. I mean, there was a lot of different people. There was Orthodox Jewish people, there was secular Jewish people, there was brown people, the black people, white people, Christians. Everybody was able to get along way better, and there was no censoring of anything. If you actually look back to the 80s, yes, of course there were issues. Of course there was racism. Of course, it's been around for so long. But when you look back to the 80s and the 90s, people got along way better, way better. And it was because you were able to say certain things and somebody could take it lightly. Everybody had thicker skin on top of that. Nobody got outrageously mad over microaggressions. You turn your face a certain way, you say a certain things, you talk with your hands too much, and that's determined as violence or something. None of that existed. So people actually were able to get along better because the more that you can talk and the more that you can say and the more that you can conversate, the more you can connect with one another. That's with black people, white people, Asian, like whatever. As long as you can say what you have to say, you can actually connect more. And you used to see that a lot more. And now all of a sudden there's all these boxes set up. And that's just division. There was way less division back then. Way less. Tucker Carlson says when Trump talks about make America great again, Tucker Carlson is like, he's like 80s, the 80s. That's what Trump is talking about. Going back to the 80s.
Well, I was on Timcast recently, and I said on Timcast, when Family Matters was on, we weren't obsessed with race. Like if you watch CNN right now, every 2 sentences, it's about someone's racial identity, sexual identity, gender identity. Back then, we didn't have any of that. We weren't constantly obsessed with people's race it verges and borders on a fetish right now on the left, this identity politics that leads to this divide and balkanization that you're talking about. And so when you had shows like Family Matters, that was not a black show. Exactly. That was just our favorite show. And Steve Urkel was our favorite character. He wasn't a black actor. They weren't asking him what's it like to be a black lead actor. It was just a show because we were all humans. And so these labels, these boxes, the constant pitting these little groups against each other, it is all intentional. It's gotten so much worse under Obama and then the Biden administration. But you're absolutely spot on. It has led to absolutely no harmony and nothing but acrimony, division, and people being unable to agree to disagree. And in my opinion, it's led to a much shallower intellectual discourse. Yeah. And it's almost bordering on the point where we can't even talk anymore. People won't even talk to their neighbor if they voted for a different presidential candidate. That was never the case in the 90s. And again, I blame identity politics that is used day in and day out by Democratic politicians, the mainstream media, and the woke mob. And we have them to thank for this world that we live in now.
Now, I want to just touch on something really quick. You were on The Bachelor, okay? That's one of my
Yes.
things. I'm constantly involved in the culture wars and the World Economic Forum and the conspiracies. I'm always looking and researching that type of stuff. So sometimes I just sit down and watch mind-numbing reality TV. I have to know, how fake is all of that? Are they positioning you in certain ways? Is that all very, very just stage type of stuff? Like, tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I've spoken out about this before, but yes, you're spot on. So they didn't have a script for us, but they would ask people to sit in certain areas. So, for example, they asked me and three other guys to sit by the fireplace and told us, "You guys sit here and have a conversation about this." At the time it was Caitlin, and so you have this
Wow.
conversation, and then of course the cameras were right there, and so they were directing us and telling us what the content of our conversation should be about. They also would determine who had access to the Bachelorette, and so there was a few times where I wanted to go up, introduce myself, and talk to her, and they said no and escorted other cast members to go talk to her. So it was very
Wow.
staged in that sense, for sure. Yeah.
So when they position three of you, it's like Josh doesn't like this guy. This guy doesn't like that. Maybe like, are they putting you guys together because you guys might be at odds with each other, that type of thing?
I can't speculate to that. I just know they wanted us three talking about this specific topic and what we thought about Caitlin in this area right here by the fireplace. It wasn't just an organic, anyone's moving around, anyone's talking to whoever they want, how they want to. We were like chess pieces and they were moving us around. And then during the rose ceremony, I noticed that there was this list that kept being brought up to the Bachelorette and with writing on it. And so I just found that odd. And I'm sure I can only speculate that that had the names of people that I'm speculating the producers probably wanted her to pick or give
Yeah.
roses to. And so, how much autonomy? I think our autonomy was definitely limited on that show, at least from what I experienced.
Wow, that's very interesting. I've worked in film and television. I've worked on movies. I've worked on TV shows and stuff, but I never got a chance to actually work in reality at all. Probably better off. It seems like it's a major slog, but I've worked behind the scenes quite a bit on different things. But aside from the reality TV, I noticed now you're getting into. I saw some Christ talk on the
Yes.
on the Twitter, on the X. I saw some Christ
Yes.
talk and I was like, "Oh, is he now is he now trans Christian? Is that what it is? Like you're transitioning to
Trans
Christian?"
religious.
Yeah, yeah, trans religious type of journey now. What is that about? What's
Yeah.
going on there?
No, that's real. I would never troll that. I'd only troll, something as despicable as, a movement trying to brainwash kids like the trans movement. But no, this is not a troll. I grew up religious, man. I grew up homeschooled my whole life, with the exception
Mm.
of 1 year. I went to public school my sophomore year because I begged my parents to let me go. But other than that 1 year, I was homeschooled all the way up until college. And I grew up with born again Christian parents. My mother's
Wow.
ethnically and culturally Jewish, but her and my father were religious Christians, born again. And so I grew up in a very
Wow.
strict household where focus on the family was on every single day. My parents would, listen to what Focus on the Family was saying about don't let your kids watch Aladdin, don't let your kids read Harry Potter. And it was that kind of a household. And I would say it bordered on cultish, and it was very strange. And so that put me off to religion for a very long time. And when I went to college and later to law school, I became an agnostic and I just felt like there wasn't enough evidence of God. But again, I always identified as an agnostic, not an atheist. So I was open to, if evidence presents itself, I'm open to it. I just haven't seen it. And now as I've gotten older, I've not only, I'm no longer woke like I was back then, but I'm no longer an agnostic. So, I identify more with being a libertarian, conservative, and a Christian as well. And that's just due to many things that have happened in my life. I lost my grandparents in the last few years. I lost my father in 2021. I've become estranged from one brother and had multiple things happen with other close family members. And so I have just noticed what I think is a spiritual war going on. And from the things that I've observed and just my own spiritual and mental health, to me, the religion of Christianity, I think, is a utilitarian religion. I think it's a helpful religion. I think it's a helpful life philosophy, pragmatic philosophy, and I think it's a true religion. And Jesus Christ was a real person. And so, no, that's not a troll. It's real. But I know that lots of people online think because I trolled trans people, somehow I'm trolling Christians, which is bizarre. Because as a centrist slash right leaning person that's very vocal, why would I troll Christians? They're such a large part of our community on the right that I would never do that. So I think that's interesting.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, because I only just, I saw you briefly, and then all of a sudden the social experiment came out, you talked about it, and then all of a sudden I see you on Rogan, and then I saw the Christ talk, and I was like, wait a second, is he going for the Hail Mary right now? No pun intended there. But I was, yeah, it was very interesting to see, and that's good to hear, man. That's an interesting background you have there.
Yeah.
I grew up with pretty much no religion. Actually, not really realizing that my grandfather was a priest,
Okay.
grandfather that I'm actually named after. I didn't know that, but he was a priest. And, but growing up, didn't really have any religion. Grew up around a lot of Orthodox Jewish people. And because they're so to themselves, it's like a place called Crown Heights, Black people, Jewish people. But because they were so to themselves, it always threw me off of religion. I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to
Yeah.
be any religion if it's like closing people off and making people feel, left out. I didn't like that. But as I started growing and as I moved to different places, I started realizing there's something to community. There's something to community and having that and taking care of each other and taking care of your own. So I understood where they were coming from. Obviously I didn't convert to Judaism or anything, but I did embrace Christ about 2.5 years ago, about the
Nice.
same time that I got sober. It actually happened at the
Okay.
exact same time. So I got sober. I wanted to be a better man, a better father. I wasn't a father at the time, but I knew on the path I was going, I was going to end up like my father, which was, he drank a little too much. He was estranged from a lot of his kids, didn't have the best relationship. And I didn't want to go down that path with my wife, and my future kids that I knew were going to be here. So I got sober, and I used to meditate a lot. I was a little woke like yourself, in the meditation and things like that, and crystals and stuff like that. And one day I just decided, you know what, instead of praying to the structure, I'm just going to pray to the architect. Like, instead of
Mm.
meditating, I'm going to just pray to the architect of everything. Instead of concentrating on the universe, I'm going to concentrate on who created the universe. And yeah, it was a hard time. I had to give my wife all my credit cards and stuff. I was smoking too much weed and stuff like that. I really had to just stop that type of stuff. And I went upstairs in the studio where I started this podcast, actually. And I got on my knees for the first time and I prayed to God and I said, if you could just bring me around some people who are like minded in Christ, who are religious, um, I need some good people around me. Not that, I had some core friends, but I needed some people who were like in touch with that type of thing. And literally a day later, this guy who's like a good friend of mine now, part of his Christian men's group, he actually messaged me and he goes, hey, he goes, I have this Christian men's group. He's like,
Wow.
you want in? Just out of nowhere. We didn't talk. We met each other years ago when I was getting there was a film set near the church that he and his family ran, and we just exchanged numbers randomly, but we never talked. And yeah, he just messaged me and said, "You want to join?" And I said, "Yeah." And that was it. And then from there, it was
Wow.
like prayer and going to church, and then going and asking God to touch my heart, my mind, my soul, my wife's heart, mind, soul. And, my wife went to church for the first time because of me. I started praying when she was pregnant over our unborn child. That turned into her praying over me praying
Mm.
over her. And now, like, prayer is such a big part of our lives. It just completely transformed all in that one moment. Just submitting, getting on my knees, and just being obedient to the Creator. it's just yeah, it changed everything for me.
Well, and with addiction, it's so insidious, and there really
Yeah.
is a spiritual war going on with addiction. And I think religion offers something that can fill the void that many
Mm,
people are trying to fill with addiction. And so I just think addiction is so nuanced. I struggled with it in 2018,
mm,
2019, got sober in November of 2019. My addiction
good.
was not alcohol, it was something else, but I know a lot of people struggle with alcohol.
Mm,
And since then, I've now been sober for 5 years and 2 months. And
amazing.
so, yeah, religion just grounds you. It gives you rules and limits when sometimes it's hard to find those, and it kind of circumscribes your life and gives you a set of, morals and mores to live by. And I just think that, again, it's a very pragmatic and edifying philosophy, life philosophy to move through life with, because a lot of us feel unmoored without that. And it doesn't always have to be religion. For some people, weightlifting or sports and
Mm,
are very helpful in that. And I do all of those things. Fitness is very central to my life now. When it wasn't when I was in the throes of addiction.
mm,
And so I think there are many things that we can do that kind of ground us and give us a sense of meaning. And one of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a
mm,
concentration camp survivor, Holocaust survivor. And he says most people who are depressed, perpetually depressed, clinically depressed, are so because they're living in this kind of existential vacuum where life
mm,
feels meaningless to them because they lack a purpose. And he says you can get that purpose through a passion or a vocation. And so I think having a passion that imbues you with a sense of purpose every day is just so important. And whether it's religion or fitness or anything else, or politics or being a political influencer, whatever it is that gives you a sense of purpose, I think that is central to kind of warding off and buttressing yourself against depression and anxiety. And so I have found that whenever I have a greater sense of purpose and meaning in my day to day life, I fall prey less and less to depression and anxiety. And so, depression and anxiety is something that I have dealt with since I was 15 years old. It's something
mm.
that's in all of my hundreds of story highlights that are there in my bio and my Instagram page. And because of my history with mental health and overcoming it through cognitive behavioral therapy, it's why I felt so strongly about gender ideology, mental illness as relates to gender dysphoria, and why I feel like the only humane and truly kind and compassionate thing we can do for people that are struggling with delusions is to restructure those faulty thoughts. And what I see society doing with indulging those that faulty thinking, and not only indulging it and entertaining it, but celebrating it. The fact that we are celebrating faulty and false thinking, I think, is just a catastrophe. But again, the medical communities, big pharma, politicians, they're all incentivized to go along with this stuff, indulge the
Victimhood.
delusions. Yep, exactly.
Victimhood, everything you just mentioned in terms of the industries, all victimhood helps support all of that.
Yes.
People who are celebrating victimhood, they move towards those things as their little band-aids and whatnot. And yeah, it's and also it speaks to people having thinner and thinner skin,
Mm.
and also there's somebody, his name I believe is, I think it's Kurt Jackson, but he's a guy I see on Instagram, and he was actually saying something very interesting. He was saying a lot of people who are woke, the reason that they act the way they do and get so inflamed and so mad when you misgender or you say something that's wrong in their view, or you vote for someone that's wrong in their view, the reason that they get so angry is because they're not connected to any spiritual belief. They're
Hmm.
not connected to God. They don't have a promise of eternal life like so many religions have. And when you're operating like that, this here and now is your heaven. So if this is heaven and this is all you get, then you're going to fight tooth and nail when someone calls you the wrong thing. You're going to get really mad when these people feel this way. And you could just ignore them, but it's like, no, no, I don't want to just ignore them. I actually want the government to do something. I want the government to step in. I want them to remove those people. I don't think those people should be allowed to be there. They shouldn't be allowed to vote for that guy. That guy should be taken off the ballot. That's why they act that way, because this is all they believe they
Well,
have.
and gender ideology is a religion for them.
Yes, yes, it
It
helps.
has supplanted traditional religion and has become one itself. It is a cult, though. It's not just a religion. It is a cult. And what a cult is, by definition, is a veneration of a set of ideas or a person. And they venerate this idea that somehow gender can trump sex, even though that flies in the face of all science and logic. And they have really venerated this set of false ideals. And it, like you just pointed out, if you go against that veneration, that cult gets very angry. Another
Mm-hmm.
hallmark of that cult is special or secret knowledge. And
Mm-hmm.
what that is only we know about this secret knowledge. You
Mm-hmm.
can't know about it, but just trust us. And that is a hallmark of all cults, Scientology, any of them. And the trans cult and gender movement has that same set of special or secret knowledge. Just trust us. These men really are women. You don't get it because you don't understand gender and the nuances, but just trust us about this secret knowledge because we know this for sure. And so they, to a T, no pun intended, are a cult. And I've never seen a more vicious, angry cult in my life. And that's why I feel, again, so strongly about it because of what you said. If you go against it or you refuse to misgender them, because they're misgendering themselves and they want you to misgender them, and we're simply saying, no, I'm going to call you what you are. They get so angry about it. And the reason why is because it's a cult. And we know with Scientology and all the other cults, they get very angry when someone leaves the cult or someone refuses to join the cult or someone speaks out against the cult. And so I hope everyone listening out there, just go look up what cults are, what they traditionally have been, and ask yourself,
Well,
is this a cult? And of course it is.
well, I mean, I don't know about Scientology. I mean, they have Tom Cruise as their Jesus, and
Yeah,
that's a pretty solid Jesus they got there,
that's true.
jumping out of helicopters and stuff. I mean,
He
that
is my
guy's
favorite actor, but
right.
he's
I
a
mean,
weirdo.
he is solid,
So is John Travolta and everyone
right?
else who's in that cult. Yeah.
Oh man, I could tell you stories about that guy. But uh yeah, you said that you only had so much time, so I don't
Well,
want to.
we can go as long as you want. Yeah, I'm good. We can go as
Okay,
long.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't eating up anything here. I know you have a lot of stuff, like we were talking about. When the Rogan effect hits, I'm sure it hits very hard. So
Yes.
I didn't want to take away from everything that's going on with you right now. But yeah, you're 100% right. It's an interesting thing. What else did I have? I had the Bachelor. I had the Love. So where do you want to go next with this whole thing? Do you want to like here's the thing. I was like in my video, I was like, this guy's putting on makeup too much. Like this guy's gotten better at putting on lipstick than my wife here. I mean, is that going to continue, or are you moving on to other things? Like, what's next for you?
A little bit of both. I'm a little fluid in my approach, no pun intended, but I wanted to get at the gender fluid stuff actually and the non binary stuff. So I decided to, I came out and told the truth and said this was all a social experiment. Like any other trans woman, I'm just a dude in a costume. And after that, I said, you know what? The medical guidelines and scientific literature all say that we can be gender fluid and non binary. So guess what? I was a man, I became a woman, I went back to a man. I'll go back to a woman again because the literature says I can present any way I want to at any time. I can be gender fluid, non binary, and trans all at the same time if I want, even if I have detransitioned. And so I was really just trying to bring out the absurdity of these rules and showing, hey, I can dress up as a woman today. I can dress up as a man tomorrow. I can present as a muscular, jack tattooed guy today, and then tomorrow throw on a dress and I'm a woman. And I want you all out there to know the medical guidelines say this is valid. So do you trust the science? And that's really what I've been trying to get at this last month or so is, do you really trust the science that the science is saying this is valid? The science is saying this is science. Relying on people's self declarations and self ID cannot be science because people's self ID can be false. They can make mistakes with it. They can go, I thought I was a woman, but now I realize I'm not. How is that science? Science needs to be objective. It needs to be verifiable. It needs to rely on data. And so I've really just been trying to draw out the absurdity of the science, and that's why trust the science has kind of become the new tagline on my Instagram
So,
page with everybody.
so you're going everywhere with this. You're
Yeah,
you're you're doing a tour of all the possible things that you're allowed to be now.
yeah.
That's very interesting, man. Because I mean, people have always made the argument. I've heard this on Pierce Morgan and different shows and different like little debate type of shows where somebody will say like, well, why can't I be black? Why can't I be a black woman? And that's where the person who's on that woke side will look at them with kind of disgust, or kind of look at them like they're dumb, like you're not allowed to do that. But that's where it ends up going.
If we can change from a man to a woman, and they started off saying just gender. Now, if you look at the literature and guidelines, it says you can change your sex, and it doesn't call it your biological sex anymore. It says assigned sex, suggesting and implying that our sex is assigned, when they used to say just 10 years ago, these same people, sex can't change, but you can change your gender. Well, that is morphed now, and they're actually claiming you can change your sex. If we can change our sex, why can't I change my race? Why can't I identify as a different race when race is so much more nebulous, so much more fluid, and so much more amorphous than our sex? Why can't I? If anything, I should be allowed to be transracial, and it should be transgenderism, which isn't allowed. So I just think it's so interesting that you can do the one, but you can't do the other. And so that's why I started saying I was transracial and saying, guess what? The science says I can't identify as a different race, but I can go from a man to a woman and back again as many times as I want. And that should be celebrated. It's a
you
joke. It's a
you
joke.
you should find one of those outdoor like pull-up places where all those black dudes are doing pull-ups and stuff, and just do a video there just doing pull-ups and push-ups.
I
I'm
have one by
telling
my
you.
house. Actually have an out gym at a park out by my house where I filmed a lot of my videos. And I thought of throwing on a do rag. It's not even a do rag; it's a compression shirt, but it identifies as a do rag. So don't worry. And maybe throwing a black and mild in my mouth and doing pull ups, because being black is nothing more than just a costume I can throw on, right? Being black is nothing more than a do-rag and a black and mild. I mean, that is how trans women are approaching womanhood. Being a woman is nothing more than lipstick, altering your voice a little bit, and throwing on a dress. It is so insulting. It is peak male hegemony. It is
Hmm.
just peak irony that you have men mansplaining to women what it is to be a woman. And I just think it's peak misogyny. The whole movement to me is just peak misogyny. It's so insulting. And it would be like me eating hot Cheetos, smoking a black and mild, doing pull ups with a do rag, and saying I'm a black guy. That is the kind of derision that I
Mhm.
think woman face is deserving of. The same as blackface, because they're both offensive and they're both insulting.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. I mean, yeah, who wouldn't agree with that, right? I mean, if you just did, and it's funny because if you just do that, and I'm sure you've probably even received some of that hate just with your post, but if you do that, people will be like, well, you're racist, or you're this, or that's exactly what you just said. It's not a costume that you can take on and off. Anybody who's black would, say that. It's very rare that a black person like I'm comedian slash political commentator. So like I love going along with it. I love seeing somebody do that. I was actually saying to my audience, I'm like, I'm gonna go whiteface and I'm gonna identify as Alex Jones. And I'm gonna be like, there's black helicopters, ladies and gentlemen. If I'm going to tell you guys some real important news, I'm going to wear straight whiteface. What are they going to do about it?
What can they say? But they'd say it's only you to be racist. You have to have an institution of power. So a black person can never be racist. Only a white person, because they have institutions and structural institutions of power. So they change the definitions of words. So, anyways, I think you're in the clear. I don't think you can be racist. You can call me anything you want, because they've changed the definition of racism. So,
Like yeah, hey, listen, I like it. It makes things a lot easier for me.
right.
Makes things a lot easier for me. And it is true. There's some things that, like, I'm sure you haven't even watched it, but I'm sure you've seen clips here and there. The things that Joy Reid says on
I cannot
MSNBC,
stand her. She is the
she
scum
is,
of the earth.
it's so race. Some of the stuff she says is so racist that if it was the other way around, they would be like, this person has to get off TV. They would deplatform that person 100%. But she's just allowed to say these things very openly. Like I've heard her, I think she was talking about these kids who were in college and they were having something called White Boy Summer, which is just, white guys having fun. They're
It's
wearing
Chet
glasses.
Hanks, man.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Chet
They're
Hanks.
having fun. They're not doing anything bad. And she was comparing them to Nazis. I was like, wow. I'm like, she's just allowed to do this. It's so interesting because for my research, sometimes if I'm looking for a clip, I have to watch a whole episode of her show.
Oh
And I'm
God, I'm
like,
so sorry, man.
yeah, man. And I'm like,
Fuck.
I can't believe what she is allowed to say. And she's paid millions of dollars to say it. It's
Well, and it
mind
goes
blowing.
to the division and acrimony we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, where it's always the left playing identity politics, and the left really has become what they used to loathe about the right. There used to be a huge complaint about the religious right that they were the moral police in the 90s. Stop policing people's morality was the refrain you always heard from the left about the religious right. Look, if you
Mm.
want to be a Christian and live your life a certain way, that's fine. Just don't push that onto us. Guess who has become the moral police in 2025? It's the left. And for the last 20 years, they have been the moral police, constantly policing not only our morals, but words we use, how we say words.
Yeah.
They're constantly telling us how we have to live. And so it's very interesting that they really have become and embraced with a frenetic pace the very thing they used to loathe about the religious right. And it makes sense because, like we said, they're a religious cult. So it makes sense that they would have moral policing going on when you're a religious cult like the left is.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that there's going to be a shift now that Trump is getting back in office? I think Mark Zuckerberg, I've talked about this. His shift of what's going on is a lot of it is because of Trump. A little bit of it's cuz Trump threatened to put him in prison if he continues what he's doing and
Love it.
he can find any proof that he's actually had an effect on, elections and whatnot. But I yeah, I think a lot of what you see with Mark Zuckerberg, he's shifting because everybody knows there's a red wave coming along with Trump, and I like it. I like it myself. I think it needs to happen. I think, like you said, it's just swung too far the other way. I'm hoping it stops with the online. If Donald Trump does something that he said he would do, which is try to sign it's almost like a constitutional right but online, because a lot of these companies don't have to adhere to the First Amendment.
Right.
But he's trying to make something where they would. So like a digital constitution of sorts he's talking about. I hope that happens. But what do you think about the shift that could or could not happen with Trump?
Yeah, well, I think the answer is twofold. I think there already was a shift, and that
Mm-hmm.
is why Trump got elected. And I
True.
think Trump getting elected was a referendum on all the woke stuff that we've seen for the last however many years. And I
Mm-hmm.
think him getting into power because of that shift is going to make the shift even greater. It's going to compound it. So, absolutely, there's been a shift. That shift is going to become even greater. I think it is a cultural war, a spiritual war, and there's no doubt that things are changing. You already mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. You see he's getting rid of the fact checking and going for community notes. You see the
Mm-hmm.
rise of X and free speech because, as they say, the difference between fact and conspiracy theories is usually about 6 months. So things that were labeled conspiracy theories during the Biden administration, months later, whether it's Hunter Biden's laptop or side effects of it would actually be proven correct. But those things had been censored as false earlier. And so I think it's very good that you have a free speech platform like X. You see the changes Mark Zuckerberg's going to make. You see Trump coming to office. You see Justin Trudeau resigning. You see the pushback against postmodern gender ideology. All of those are very, very great signs. And yes, I hope it only continues in this kind of regressive progressivism that we've seen, atavistic, where we're reverting back to just the most base things where we divide each other based on our race and how we identify. I really think we're moving away from the era of identity politics and moving on to just shared values as Americans. And so I
Yep.
hope it continues with Trump and after Trump. And so I think what's interesting is kind of prognosticating who's going to take over after Trump. And I think Vance, I've seen his interviews where he went against Dana Bash on CNN. I watched that
Mm-hmm.
live and watched his vice presidential debate live. I think he is an amazing spokesperson. He always remains on point. He has great talking points and he's able to articulate them. I would love to see Vance run after Trump's term is over.
Yeah, I'm hoping Vance. Well, there's now what Trump has done is just incredible. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard moved over to being a Republican. RFK has done everything except announce that he's now a Republican. I mean, there's a lot of options in terms of people to run. I mean, Vance and Vivek would be amazing.
Yeah.
Vance and Tulsi would be amazing. RFK and Tulsi would be amazing. Like, there's so many combinations now just within this little group that Trump has put together that I'm very excited. But it does have to happen because this change, whether it's the economy, or, we're talking about culture wars here, it's not going to happen just in 4 years. There actually does have to be a good 8 to 12 years of someone like Vance, of someone like Trump Jr., of these people actually running the country for there to be like real substantial hardcore change to have to happen. So I'm
Well,
hoping Vance does it because he seems good. I didn't like him at first because he was a never Trumper, but as I kept hearing him, like you said, every single interview, he handles himself so well. Joe
he's so
Rogan handled himself so well. Like he's great.
He's so unflappable. I think with the democratizing effect of social media too, that's so important as well. Because even if someone gets into power that's not ideal, like Joe Biden, if you have free media and not a media where there's a monopoly on the narrative and they're all repeating the same false narratives, that's very democratizing and very liberating. And so I think with the rise of X and Meta and everything else, it's going to be harder for misinformation to be spread from the top down from Democratic administrations. And so even if the left comes back into power after Trump, I don't think they will be as efficacious as they have been in the past because of social media and the ability for us to fact check the patently false lies that they keep trying to peddle to us.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying it's a monopoly. I don't even see it as a monopoly. I mean, as I do my research, it's very coincidental, I guess, that every single thing that the administration says, all of a sudden, all of media starts saying at the exact same time. They're an arm. They're an arm. They're an arm that says and does the things and influences people that the administration cannot. That's exactly what they are. I mean, it's been shown. I mean, Tucker Carlson, a lot of people just refer to Tucker as a political commentator. He is like a mainstream media whistleblower because he's talking. He's done interviews where he's talked about people that he knows get talking points from certain organizations, from the administration. He has gone on record saying this. And I 100% believe it because you can see it. If you're just
Yeah.
watching what the administration is saying, and then watching what's on MSNBC, which a lot of people don't because it's a dying media, and then watch CNN. It's like, how are they all saying the same things at the same time? Like, how
There
are
have
they
been
all saying sharp as attack at the same time?
there have been,
That's
I mean, in Biden's mental decline, I'm so glad you brought that up. That, again, something that they were saying conspiracy theory 4 years ago. It was as bright as day that this man, if he had had a stutter, it never manifested as someone with severe cognitive decline who couldn't get a sentence out and couldn't walk. But they were telling us that, we were wrong about that. And he's sharp as attack. But there's been so many montages and mashups of local and national
so many.
media parroting each other and saying the exact same thing verbatim. And one of my favorite talking heads is Chris Plant. He's on in the mornings from 9 to 11 Central Standard Time. He is absolutely hilarious. And like many of us, a former woke liberal who got so disgusted by what was going on with the left and how extreme they've gotten that he, went over to the right. And he says they're not journalists. They're democratic apparatchiks. And
Yes.
they
Yes.
are because they simply parrot the administration line. And it's something
Mm-hmm.
out of North Korea. It's something out of a communist failed state where you
Yes.
have what's supposed to be independent journalists literally parroting the official line from Democratic officials. And again, that draws out why it is so liberating and so important that we have social media to counter these democratic apparatchiks that are posing as journalists in the mainstream media.
Yeah, you said his name's Chris Plant. What is he on? What network
He's
is he
on
on?
for me it's 890 AM. So
Okay.
it's on AM radio, and he is one of the most quick-witted, most hilarious. He points out the hypocrisies of the left every other sentence. He calls them what they are, mentally ill idiots. And he is just absolutely hilarious. I believe he used to be a talking head at CNN 20 years ago, and then
Wow.
deflected from them because of how ridiculous the stuff he saw going on. And there's another one. Glenn Greenwald is one of my favorite people, one of the most well-respected journalists
Oh,
in
Glenn Greenwald.
yes, in the
Yeah, yeah.
world. And he is someone else who day in and day out on X is calling out the utter hypocrisy of the left. They were calling George W. Bush Hitler, they were calling Trump Hitler, but then you see these same people that were calling them that hanging out with them and having jovial conversations. And he'll go, wow, Barack Obama hanging out with who he said was the next Hitler, who
Yeah.
is going to ruin America and take it back to the 1940s. He's having a lighthearted conversation with this guy. And so he's just always pointing out how hypocritical they are and how everything they say is a falsehood. And I love Glenn. He's amazing.
Yeah, Glenn's great. He has a couple of interviews with Tucker Carlson. They're really, really solid. You can see that on Tucker's channel. I've even covered some of the stuff they've talked about. But going back to what you said about what they actually are and they're not journalists, I have to listen to a lot of MSNBC, sadly. And Joy Reid, while this whole thing was going on with Trump and Biden in the debates, when Biden just completely humiliated himself, she was saying, she's like, I've been on the phone with Democrat operatives. And I'm like, you're a journalist. Why are you on the phone with Democrat operatives? And she's like, and we're trying to figure out what to do. I'm like, what? I'm like, you're actually saying this on TV? I'm
Look
like,
at George Stephanopoulos. He was Clinton's campaign manager, and now we're supposed to think he's some unbiased Today Show host. I mean, he doesn't always give political commentary, but this guy is literally a Democratic operative, and now he's a journalist in the news media. And if you just look where most of these people came from, it tells you right away who they work for, who's paying them, and what their motives are. So you don't have to guess.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. As I because I've had a YouTube channel for like 10 years, but my podcast turned into what it is now, the Soul Not for Sale podcast, 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. And within that time, I've really had like I understood that you didn't trust the media, but you really start to see the path in terms of when you're talking about like where they come from. Anderson Cooper's a Vanderbilt and
Yep.
like all these little things where you're like, oh man, like what am I watching when I watch this mainstream media stuff? But you're watching a lot of propaganda, like it's really interesting to see. And I've talked about it many times with my viewers, and I always say that the next phase is YouTube. So it's like, don't feel like just because you're not watching any of the mainstream stuff that you're just like you're impervious to it. They're coming
Sure.
over, they're doing the YouTube thing. They're gonna find guys that look like me, that look just like regular, not journalist looking guys. And they're gonna find those people slowly. And you're gonna have to really understand, like you're gonna have to watch them the same way and see like where did they come from? What are they talking about? What are they not willing to talk about? I found that very interesting, especially as I started seeing it more as Tucker Carlson went to interview Vladimir Putin. I started seeing one thing that stood out to me is that Jon Stewart had the same talking points as mainstream media. And I was like,
Wow.
I'm like, okay. Like when I was a kid, and I was smoking joints and I was watching the Comedy Network and Jon Stewart would come on, I'd be like, oh, wow, this is like cool journalist stuff. Wow, cool. But no, no, no. That guy is another propagandist type.
Well,
He's
and it's
saying
interesting
stuff.
in Stephen Colbert, it's even more cringe
Yes.
watching kind of how he went from being this extremely adroit, intelligent satirist on Comedy Central to the most brain dead, peddling, humorless prick that I have ever seen on nighttime television. And it's like, what happened? And of course, all of these people are selling out for money. They're all, have the same goals as, Democrat politicians. But
Yeah.
it's when I see the things that they were peddling years ago, like offering cheeseburgers to people that would get a vaccine, and then that same vaccine gets recalled, and it turns out that vaccine was harming people. And you just sit there and watch what these once well-respected people are doing, and it just makes you lose all respect for them. And it's very sad to see where Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert went, because I used to look up to them and think their show was hilarious. And even with, I believe, John Oliver,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's the same as all of them.
John
Same thing.
Oliver, he's over there saying, I don't understand why women have a problem with trans women. And, the fact that he refuses to call a man pretending to be a woman a man, and is saying women basically need to shut their mouths and put up or shut up. It made me lose all respect for John Oliver. And I used to love his show and think he was hilarious.
Yeah, yeah, me too, man. I used to love it. But think about Stephen Colbert. Think about how massive he would be right now if he kept that character going.
Mm.
He was just as Trump was coming, if he stayed in that right solid position of being that guy, he would have been massive, because he was like Mr. America when he was on the show. He was like Mr. It was amazing. It was hilarious. And he was genuinely hilarious.
Yeah.
If he had stayed in that position, he would be the biggest thing on TV right now.
Well, and even after he left, and then you have Collateral Damage with Trevor Noah, who I have never once laughed at a single joke or thing I have ever heard him say. He is so completely unfunny. It's astounding, and I can't believe that out of everyone in the world, that's who they picked to pick up the show. And Trevor Noah, I mean, he's met with success in the liberal media. He gets to write a book with a liberal publisher and make appearances with a bunch of liberal idiots, but he's objectively unfunny. And I just think a lot of these people are just clowns. But the liberal world is a loony one. It's a clown world. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that clowns get elevated to this kind of king status within it, because they're a bunch of losers. So
yeah, definitely second that on Trevor Noah. I never understood the appeal, and I was shocked when he took over the show. I was like, I don't even understand. But again, it has to be the people who are willing to do it. When you see everybody who's on MSNBC and CNN, these are the people who are willing to do it. They're the people who are willing to be like, I was a journalist, and now somebody's walking in and they're handing me what I'm going to say, and I do not question it, and I will get my 8 figures a year. And that's it. And that's a hard person to find, because a lot of regular people, if you put them in that position, they would eventually do what Tucker Carlson did. They'd eventually have this show where they'd be like, I'm going to say what I want for a while, and they would get fired eventually. You would see a lot more of that. So it takes a special type of person to fill those type of roles, man. They're very much a necessary evil. And I mean, when you look at it, I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Rogan said once, he's like, they're like a dying podcast that's in a massive building. Like, there's no way it makes money. There's no way it's like doing well. That's why CNN is hemorrhaging money. I imagine MSNBC is going through a very similar thing. It's like, I don't know. I don't get. I chalk it up to it being a necessary evil, and there are certain people paying certain things off behind the scenes, because what they advertise on mainstream media, the things that they're constantly advertising, they're owned by a big company, and that big company also owns stake in the media companies as well. So it's like a little necessary engine to get those advertisements out for those products, those healing products.
that explains it, and it makes a lot of sense. And I love to see viewership declining. I saw numbers posted of the staggering decline in MSNBC and CNN viewership. We all know about the infamous incident where CNN Plus was only getting 2,000 viewers. My story posts get 20,000 viewers every day, and that's like me, snapping a picture in the mirror or something stupid, and I was crushing their numbers. And so it's just really good and heartening to see that people aren't buying the lies anymore from the mainstream media, and they're going, you know what, we don't trust you. When you tell us over and over again that Hunter's laptop is Russian misinformation, and 50 intelligence officers wrote this supposed letter saying this is a fake story, and then 8 months later it turns out, nope, that's not the case. It actually was true about his laptop. and everything contained in it, people lose faith. And I think the dying viewership is a testament to lost faith in the mainstream media. And I think the booming amounts of people that are using social media kind of attest to the veracity of the information that's contained on these online forums. And so I hope you're right. I hope YouTube is kind of the next landscape for news media. But regardless, if you tell a lie long enough and people start waking up, they're gonna stop listening. And I think that's what we're seeing with the mainstream media.
Yeah, definitely. So for you, especially after this conversation, I see two avenues for you. Now, you could go into making some kind of documentaries and
Yeah.
doing that kind of thing, or you could do something like what I do and how I'm on, the political commentary type stuff. Which have you considered either of those avenues right now? Like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I definitely get so many messages saying you should start a podcast, you should start a podcast, and I really should. I think I do need to do that. I think people would like to listen. Look, in undergrad, I majored in sociology, minored in political science. I went on to get my Juris Doctor, graduated law school, and I'm very politically oriented. And then obviously with my social experiment, I've kind of gained national exposure and people know about me. So I would like to use my voice. I think I have something substantive to offer on socio-political issues, and I'd love to opine during a 2-hour podcast or whatever on a YouTube channel. So I think that is something that I'm definitely considering. Right now, I'm mostly just appearing on podcasts. So I have, I just did this with you, which was an amazing conversation. So thank you for having me. I'm going to be on Timcast on the 27th. I'm going to be on Digital Social Hour on the 29th. I'm going to be on Awaken Winning on the 30th. And then I have a interview next week with someone from Newsweek. Actually, that's this week, this Thursday. So I just want to keep the dialogue going, whether it's me making podcast appearances or starting my own podcast or getting into, news media somehow. I just want to keep offering my voice and offering my opinion and my insights on things. And, opinion is split on me. A lot of people Wikipedia describes me as a troll and provocateur. So is Josh just Milo Yiannopoulos, or is Josh someone with who is Josh Seiter? And so I think a lot of people are unsure right now because of the troll. But with Joe Rogan talking about me and Megyn Kelly and Brett Cooper and J.K. Rowling and all of these other people that have been sharing what I did and having, great words to say about me, I guess the opportunities are kind of endless right now. I just want to keep the dialogue going, man. I want to keep talking about these things. Woke idiots really annoy me. I love calling out their hypocrisy, so I just want to keep doing that, and it doesn't matter what format I'm doing it in.
Yeah, honestly, I would say, like I said, there's two avenues, but if you're thinking about starting a podcast, you definitely should. You should just start it and just see where it goes and talk
Yeah.
about things. And if you ever need any tips, I've been doing this for years. I'm like a self-taught videographer, and then I learned audio, and like I put all this stuff together myself. But I can always show you how this all works. And if you want to be a person that shows clips, you can do that. If you want to be a person that just talks or has guests on, you can do that. I'm slowly transitioning into becoming somebody who has more guests on, does more interviews. I haven't been doing that. It is something that I aspire to do. So, I think it's there for you, man. And if you
Thank
have
you.
the thought process of starting a podcast, do it. Don't not do it just because, like, do it. Do it. See what happens. Because right now things are hot, and you might as well jump in there, because it is a time where this is probably, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to speak for you. This might be your longest interview that you've done, hour and a half so
Definitely
far,
one of them. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like people are probably wanting more of that. They're probably wanting to know, if this guy's willing to troll to that extent, he's obviously on the same page as all of us. They probably want to know what you think more. And even just
Yeah.
having this conversation, it's like you definitely have a head on your shoulders. You definitely understand what's going on. You see through all the nonsense that's being put out there. Why not have a podcast? Why not speak about this? Especially if you have a wanting of continuing the dialogue. And
Yes.
100%, it's like that goes hand in hand. You get to continue the dialogue that you want to have. with a podcast. And you get to do it every week, or you can do it every day. You can do it for 2 hours a day. You can do it for 20 minutes a day. You can do it for 2 hours once a week. Like it's there, and anybody can do it. You know, I
Yeah.
have I have one of those jobs that anybody who says that they are it, kind of like what you've gone through. If you
Yeah.
say you're a
If you
podcaster,
say it,
you
you
are a
are.
podcaster.
Yeah, it's true. Yep. No,
So
you're
yeah.
absolutely right on that. And I enjoy it. I like, doing these. I was on Real AF with Andy Frisella. I was on Rumble with Tristan Tate, interviewed me. And I absolutely, and this show has been an absolute pleasure with you today. I just love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it forever. I want to talk about Thomas Sowell and, the
Mm.
points he made on race and what liberals have been doing to set Black people back for the last 50 years. I want to have those conversations. And so my interests transcend just the trans, no pun intended, trans movement and things like that. I want to talk about a host of other issues. And so I think a podcast would be the best way to do that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he brought up Thomas at all, I mean, a lot of people don't even know about him. I've been waiting for him to be on Rogan for years. I'm like,
Is he still alive?
he's still alive, and
Oh my gosh.
Rogan actually asked, he was talking to somebody, and he was like, "Is that guy still doing interviews?" And the person said he might have recently stopped doing interviews just because he's getting up there in
He's a
age.
national treasure, an
Incredible.
absolute national treasure, one of my highest idols, top three ever. I mean, his wisdom, his sage advice on all these issues, it is so prescient, so spot on. And a lot of what he was saying was in the 1980s, 1990s. And
Yeah.
it's just so spot on.
Yeah, he really he was tuned into something, and like a lot of people, he was very liberal, and he slowly pulled himself out of it as he started learning. It's kind of like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was like a socialist, and he's
Mm.
pulled himself out of it. There's so many people who have that path.
If
Maybe
it,
maybe
oh,
one
go ahead.
day maybe one day AOC will be like that. She's like really liberal, and then one day she like transforms into this Thomas South.
That would be hilarious. If anyone can, go watch Thomas Sowell's montages on YouTube. There's specifically a clip of him debating, I believe, a Department of Education advocate, a woman, and a white woman who is trying to lecture him about Black people and how incapable they are and why they need government's help. And Thomas, him ripping her and telling her why that ideology is so harmful to Blacks and why it's so patronizing. That was one of the main points in my conversion from super woke to libertarian / right, was discovering Thomas Sowell my senior year in undergrad. And I read, I believe, 3 or 4 of his books, specifically The Black Redneck.
Yes.
That one is, I mean, it is really transformative. It changes your life. And so if anyone can read about Thomas Sowell out there, please do it.
Yeah. My buddy put me onto that book a few years back. He was actually, again, somebody who was very, very left leaning and just started waking up, and he showed me that book, and I'm like, I've seen that name before, Thomas Sowell, because I've seen the clips here and there. And then I got into that book, and then I got into more of the clips, and it's like, that guy is just, he really tuned into something. I would love to see a conversation between him and Jordan Peterson. I think those are two people. Rogan would be great, but him and Jordan Peterson would be like a lecture for the ages, I think.
It's always so edifying to hear him talk. He was basically red pilled before there was red pilling going on. And he is just, and the fact that, he's this Black man, and they're always trying to, again, emotionally blackmail people on the right. The left is always trying to do that. And they can't do it with him because he's a Black man. What are they going to say? That he's racist? So their old tricks don't work with Thomas Sowell. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about him.
Yeah, that guy is great. I've experienced that myself. I've had a few liberal people try to explain to me why I'm incapable and the things that I need, and the fact that I'm telling people that I can like pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and the fact that that's toxic and I shouldn't be saying that. I've had so many conversations like that where it's like, it's so because it's like, you don't even realize, like, you're treading on racism right now as you're saying this to me. You don't even understand what's going on. You think you're doing a service
My
But it's
dad, rest his soul. Sorry to interrupt.
go ahead, go ahead.
Rest him in peace. He is one of the people that turned me into the man that I am today. He always said it's the soft bigotry of low expectations, and that is exactly what they're doing. Is the soft bigotry of low expectations. Black people are incapable unless daddy government steps in and helps them out because they're so stupid. And that's basically how the left seems to look at most people.
Those are wise words from your dad. That is exactly it. And that's what it feels like when you're
Yeah.
somebody of color and you've woken up to everything. You see, like, what a lot of people are trying to do for you is actually it's harming you more than anything. Like, I mean, just even the position of, like, being on welfare or just getting free money, things like that, affirmative action, like those things actually really harm you. You get stuck in these ruts when you go after those things and you don't try to elevate yourself more and more. If it wasn't for me working these dead end jobs and forcing myself, because there's actually a time where I was about to get approved for welfare, and I remember I knew how much I was going to get, and I knew that there was a job that I could get, and I started comparing how much money I would get from each. And right there, I was like, oh, if I take this, I'm going to stay with this because it's going to be like an addiction. It's going to be free money. It's going to be easy. So I went with the job at the grocery store that was terrible, that I hated, but being in that pushed me to like rise up and start figuring things out. And then one day I did buy a bunch of camera equipment and I did decide to start doing things like, but that doesn't happen without, having to climb. Like you get stronger as you climb, you know?
And that's a threat to their power because this goes back to the power consolidation and power play that you said, where it's straight out of Saul Alinsky's playbook, it sounds like, where they pretend to care about these marginalized groups because it consolidates their power. And if they can get millions of people on the welfare plantation, it increases their power. They don't care that these people's lives are going to be ruined. They don't care that these people's work ethic may be ruined. They don't care about it. All they care about is consolidating power. And it always comes to the detriment of the people they claim to help. And they're only hurting those people. It's like, telling someone with a mental illness that if they hack their dong off, they're going to magically become a woman. You are harming that person and telling them a lie to their detriment because it helps you and makes you look good. And I feel like that is applicable to so much of what the left does.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you think back, if you look far back, there was a time where Black people would work for themselves. They would work really hard. They weren't complaining. Like the Black people who got, who were just like very adjacent to slavery, they were like, oh, now I get to work just as hard for my own money. Okay, good. I know how to do this. I can do this. And they weren't looking for handouts. It was different, man. And they were very conservative people. And slowly, the government got into them and slowly started making it where it's like, I'll incentivize you to not be with your husband. Don't worry about him. I'll give you money. You can be a part. And slowly they started doing that to Black people. And now if you look, they're doing the same thing to white people because they've gotten the Black, like, for the most part. I mean, Trump is really starting to change things, but a lot of people can see that the Democrats kind of feel like they own the Black vote. It's like, of course you're going to come over here. You guys know that we're the ones that you're going to vote for. And slowly they're starting to do the same tactics to white people. Even just back in the day, way back in the day of like knocking down like a cocky Black person. If a cocky Black man was too out there, kind of like Thomas Sowell, people try to knock him down. Nowadays, they try to do that to white men. They will knock down a cocky white man. They will look at a white man and say, you're misogynistic, you're hateful, you're this, you're that. And they try to just
gaslighting,
hit him down as much as possible. And it's interesting thing to see. They've moved these tactics onto everybody, and it's working in some places, you know?
That is such an interesting point. They can gaslight people by, again, emotionally blackmailing them and say, if you do this, you're just being a transphobe. If you do this, you're being misogynistic. If you do this, you're being racist. And it keeps them in line. And
Yeah.
as concerns, Black success in the years after the end of Jim Crow, Thomas Sowell showed in many of his books Black success was actually a lot greater, adjusted for inflation. Their median income was better. There was only a 25% out of wedlock birth rate with children. That has jumped from 25 to 75%
Yeah.
now. So is what's happening in the Black household really due to more racism 70 years removed
Yeah.
from Jim Crow, or does it have to do with cultural values that have shifted?
Yeah.
And in addition to that, the Black incarceration has jumped, where one in every three African American men has, interactions with the criminal justice system here. And so it's just very interesting how in the years right after the end of Jim Crow, Blacks are doing better on every metric. And they're actually doing worse 70 years removed from Jim Crow. And it's because of the values and the policies of Democrats and the left, and it's
I,
really just set them back, and it's
I
sad.
was I was gonna say they embraced the left. That's what's changed the most. They embraced the left. They used to be very, very conservative people.
And religious concern. They're Christian, very big, large
Exactly.
percentage are Christians with Christian values, which tend to align with conservative values. And unfortunately, that the woke stuff has just kind of infiltrated the Black community, and to their detriment, like
Yeah.
with everyone else that they infiltrate.
Man, you put on a do rag and you get yourself some self tanner and you say this same thing. There's gonna be no Black people that can deny you, man. We're
I'll be the
gonna
next Thomas Sowell. I'll identify as him. It'll be all right. I should be celebrated, man. I'm doing something brave, okay? And I'll ask for reparations too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, man. Yeah, like solid, solid. Yeah, you put on a do-rag, you're good to go with this knowledge that you have here. This is solid, man. You are going to be an advocate. You're gonna be great.
Well, and it's funny. It's funny because in undergrad, very liberal college, where a liberal arts college, and I was in liberal curriculum doing sociology. So we were always studying the intersectionalities of, race and economics and, stuff like that. And it's interesting that actually just turned me more conservative in the end. And I think sometimes being exposed to lies for a very long period of time, it just makes you want to go in the completely opposite direction. So maybe we will see AOC 30 years from now being the next Jordan Peterson. That would be very interesting. Who do you think is the best candidate or most likely liberal right now to be conservative in 20 years because of how ridiculous the left has gotten?
That's why I brought up AOC. I think it might be her because because she's from New York, so it's like what people really talk like. She's around our age. She might be a little older. If she's from the Bronx in the 90s, she knows her family probably talks like crazy. If she has family that are New Yorkers, come on. So she knows how people really talk. She knows how
Right.
people really are. And all this stuff that she's embracing right now is so she can just be in the club. You know what I mean? So I could definitely see that
She's not
happening.
using Latinx when she's at the house with her family. She's never saying Latinx. Come on.
She's
Come on.
looking at none of her cousins saying you are a Latinx man. Zero, because they're not going to put up with it.
Something like 80% of Latinos are totally against having their language changed by a bunch of woke liberals. And I think I've seen polls, something upwards of 80% disagree with this whole Latinx thing. It's just very bizarre and weird how the left is always trying to change language and words. I mean, it would almost be funny if it weren't so dangerous, but I think the Latinx thing is probably one of the most offensive word changes that I've seen the left take on.
But yeah, I would say in 100% changing language is a very dangerous thing. Jordan Peterson talks extensively about that. But to what you're saying, I think it could be AOC. It's not like I like her, but she's young enough
Yeah.
and slowly she's starting to kind of realize that she, like most people on the left, realize if you step out of line even a touch, you get
Yes.
attacked. Even
Yes.
just her removing her pronouns from her, I believe it was her ex bio, she got attacked just for removing them. She didn't say anything disparaging. She didn't do anything. She just removed them from her bio. That's it. They attacked her. So more of that. You do that enough to a person, even someone like her, eventually she might just be like, you know what? This is getting ridiculous. I mean, we were even seeing the Young Turks starting to
Yeah,
rail
both
against
of
the
them.
left, right?
Both of them. Both
Right.
of the
Right.
hosts are. Yep.
We're
Yep.
seeing that constant. So it's like, I don't think that's out of the norm that, if she's what, 41 now, she might be 39. By the time she's 65, she might just be like, I've seen all this before. I know what you guys are doing. Like, I don't know. It's
I
possible.
lo-
I think it's
I
possible.
I love watching Chank. I love watching Anna. I love watching Bill Maher. I love watching Glenn. All of them who were liberals just a few years ago, or a year ago, even with
Yeah.
Chank. I
Yeah.
love watching them just destroy. And with anything that progressively becomes more and more radical, it's going to end up eating their own. And there's a snake, it was named after it. I think it's Ouroboros or something like that. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
snake that eats its own tail. And it's a very cannibalistic movement where they always end up eating their own. And I think, like you said, people realize, wait, we've gotten so radical that even I'm under attack now. And I used to be one of you guys. And that is turning so many people off to it. And I think that's the problem of hyper progressivism. That's the problem with, this kind of woke mob mentality that's out there right now and this kind of ethos in the left. And so I hope more and more people get disgusted by it, more and more people turn away, because I think it is really dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. You're seeing Bill Maher have to deal with it quite a bit because Bill Maher's kind of like, but Trump's a criminal. And the left's like, that's not enough anymore. That's not enough. And he's like, what do you mean? Oh, that was enough just a year or two ago. So he's kind of having malfunctions here and there where he's like, he's trying to say all the disparaging things about Trump and this and that. But the left's like, no, we want more.
I
We
have
want more.
a therapist for OCD because that's one of the things I deal with. He's one of the top experts in the world on it. He's based in Great Britain, and we were talking, and to my surprise, he came out raging against the woke mob, and he said their virtue signaling is on a level that I have never seen with obsessive compulsive disorder. With
Mm.
people suffering from pure OCD, where it's just a thought obsession, they have to think over events over and over and make sure they do things perfectly and don't anger anybody and please everybody and don't ever look a fool and everything has to be perfect. He said that liberals are like that on steroids, where their virtue signaling has reached obsessive compulsive levels that
Mm.
are insane. And he said it's never enough. And so that goes back to Bill Maher. Nothing he or any of these Chank or Anna or any of these people do will ever be enough to satiate the far left.
Yeah.
And that will be its downfall, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And we were talking about who's most likely to like move over to the right. Chank actually said something, I before I even knew what Chank who he was, I didn't like him. I just saw I would
Yeah,
watch him
he's
on
annoying.
mute and I'd be like, "Oh, this guy just seems like he's saying some vile stuff." But funny enough, I saw one of his tweets and he was completely right. He's like what I notice is he's like if I say something even slightly against the left, he's like I get attacked, I get ousted, this, that. He's like, if I say even something 2% that's in the range of like MAGA and the right, they welcome me with open arms. And I think that's the reason why you would see somebody like Chank, like Anna, eventually Bill Maher. He's going to jump over eventually. He can only do it for so long. Trump gets out of office, he'll have nothing to hate anymore, and he'll jump over. But that attitude right there of both sides, that's the reason why I think you could see someone like an AOC coming over. Because
Well,
it's
and
like, what do you want to do? You want to get attacked constantly, or do you want to have people open to hearing what you have to say, although they don't agree completely with you?
these are intelligent people that grew up, having a dialectic and a discourse where, you could debate people and agree to disagree, and they're used to that and they want to talk about these things. These are intellectuals. They want to talk about the issues and they're constantly being censored by their own people. And Cenk also made a tweet sorry, Cenk also made a tweet where Cenk tweeted and he said, "At least the right will have a conversation with me." And he said, "That's a lot more than I can say about the left." He goes, "They're not even willing to have a conversation with me." And I think so many people like me and him and many others and you are, we just want to be able to have a conversation. And if we can't have a conversation on the left without being attacked personally or being censored, what is the point anymore? And so it's that's why the right is winning, because they're offering people the ability to talk and have a discourse,
Yeah.
and that's what most people want.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I mean, compare it. I mean, CNN, Patrick Bet David's doing bigger numbers than CNN right now on all platforms. And when's the last time you saw Chank on CNN? When's the last time you had like him actually get to speak what he has to say there? Whereas Patrick Bet David was willing to have him on stage, willing to talk. He got a crazy applause, something that I don't even think Cenk is worthy of, but he still got it, you know. And they had a good conversation. They went back and forth. It's like that doesn't happen on the mainstream or on the left or anything like that. So
Well, and I think Cenk was even at AmFest a couple weeks ago
yeah,
in Phoenix, and they're welcoming him. It's just when you stop advocating for free, it's interesting that a movement which was built on diversity of opinion,
mm-hmm.
not having one homogenous group, but having minority viewpoints, and everyone's allowed to have an opinion. The left literally stands for the opposite of all of those things now. It's all about falling in line. It's all about homogeny. It's all about the orthodoxy. It's all about the official narrative. And the right is the one that's actually offering diversity of viewpoints and allowing everybody to talk and giving everybody a voice. And so it's just really sad to see the left and how far they've fallen from what they stood for, ideals they stood for in the 90s, and they no longer stand for those things anymore.
Yeah, I was having a conversation. I interviewed Jimmy Dore like a year ago, and we were talking, and I was talking about the left and the right, and he's like, "No," he's like, "That's not the left," because he remembers. He's an older guy. He remembers what the left used to be, and I'm calling like these progressives and everything the left, and he's trying to like build these boxes, and he's like, "No, no, 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 this is the left, and like what they stand for is not." But I'm like, in today's age, those people are the left,
Well, the same
sadly
thing
enough.
holds true with the LGB community. I have many, many close friends in the LGB community and family members in it as well. They are all sick of the T's. They want nothing to do with the T's. They don't know why the T's are part of the LGBs. They feel like the T's don't represent anything they do. They actually feel like the T's stand in diametric opposition to the values they stand for.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing where you have people within that community saying, no, these more radical wings don't represent us, and we don't even like them. And so I think that's good to know that not only libertarians and conservatives, but even people on the left are sick of these more radical parts of the party.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is, though, that I think they have to be more vocal. I think if something like that
Yes.
was happening on the right, and even if certain things do happen on the right, people are very quick to condemn that type of behavior. Like Trump, I have a video of Trump, like 5 minutes of him disavowing white supremacy.
Yep.
And they're talking about like, oh, these people are going to vote for you. He's like, I don't want their votes. He's like, I disavow. He's like, and he made it very clear. And obviously, they kept on saying that Trump's a white supremacist. Like, it was a whole little game they were playing with them. But there's like 5 minutes of him disavowing it. He doesn't take. He wanted to separate himself from it, even with Project 2025. It's
Yep.
very much in Trump's favor. He could have easily been like, yeah, well, what's the issue here? But instead, he's like, I'm going to disavow that. And the right's they're very attuned to doing things like that. They will disavow certain behavior because, and this is just me, a lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of them have a connection with God. When you have a connection with God, you have certain values, and there's certain things that you just won't allow. You just won't. You're not going to gather up a bunch of people just for the sake of having a bunch of people. You're going to want to make sure these people have certain values, that they're actually on the same page in this case of left and right, that they actually love America, that they love the values that it stands for. So yeah, like that's what you're not seeing on the left, which is why when you're talking about those friends that you have, like, why are they involved with us? Because it's just the gathering. It's just a
Hmm.
gathering of people. That's what rules for radicals really shows you, that they're just gathering people. They don't care who it is. As long as they're willing to stand against in unison what needs to be stood against, they'll take everybody. Everybody.
Well, and it,
That's why there's a plus at the end. The plus,
right, that's a good point.
it's for anybody. It's for
Anybody.
anyone who is willing to join and stand against what we're trying to stand against, because all of it is a play for power. All of it.
That makes perfect sense. And but without having read the book, I've been saying for years they will literally do anything for votes. If it means letting in 20 million illegals and ruining
Yeah.
our country, as long as they can get them on the voter registration polls within a few years, they don't care. They will
Mm.
literally pander and do anything for votes. And it sounds like that book kind of lays out the blueprint for how you accomplish that and how you do that. So that's very interesting, very scary. And it just makes me disgusted with the left. I already knew they didn't have any scruples, but I guess when you truly understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, it's much more nefarious than that. So.
Oh, Saul Alinsky. I mean, Hillary Clinton said that she considered him a mentor. Barack Obama took a lot of pages from his books as well, which is why Barack Obama was first a community organizer. But Saul Alinsky, I think it's in Rules for Radicals. It might be one of the books, but in his foreword, he actually thanks or shouts out Lucifer as the first rebellious person, like the first rebel of sorts.
Well, and
Yeah.
you see, even as recent as a couple weeks ago, when Joe Biden's giving the Presidential Medal of Freedom to George Soros, who openly brags in interviews how he tanked
Oh my
the
God.
economy of
Yeah.
7 countries, leading to mass poverty for tens and tens of millions of people. And Biden rewards him with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. I mean, again, we really live in Orwellian times where good is bad, bad is good, and we're being peddled so many lies, but there's nothing noble or honorable about sending tens of millions of people into poverty. And for people to think that the Democrats in Biden actually care about them or care about lower class people when he's giving George Soros that award for ruining their lives, it tells you everything you need to know about what a bunch of hypocrites they are.
Yeah, yeah. The Soros medal was like, I was way more surprised by that than the Hillary Clinton. I'm like, okay, Hillary Clinton. I'm like, they go hand in hand. They're all like in the group, but Soros, that came
Wild.
out of left field for me. I was like, what is going on here? I was so surprised by that, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense. I mean, how much money has he given?
Yep.
I mean, Alex's son was pictured with Kamala, was
Yes.
pictured with her husband, was pictured with Tim Walz. I mean, I was doing research on it, but people, like, right away when Kamala Harris started, she got donations to the tune of $100 million
Yes.
right away.
And
But then
Alex runs the foundation now,
I
so
was
that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, so the second that was announced, he was pictured with her. And I'm like, oh, well, where do you think this 100 million came from? Now, obviously, if you're on X or you're on anywhere where people can go back and forth, people were like, well, you're dumb. That was all donations from Act Blue. But then when you look into Act Blue and how Act Blue has actually been caught doing a lot of very unscrupulous things when it comes to donations. There's been a lot of independent journalists who have gone to people's houses and said, hey, this says that you've donated $150,000 to Act Blue. Have you done that? And they're like, no, I've donated maybe five in the past 3 years. And they're like, well, it says here that you've donated 150,000. That's a real thing that's going on. And it's not just
Wow.
one or two people. It's hundreds of people. Of course, because they're taking advantage of people, it's usually very old people who aren't going to
Wow.
keep up with their credit card statements and don't know. And it's kind of no harm, no foul. But again, on this channel, we put on tinfoil speedos every now and then. But
Right.
I can connect the dots there and see what's actually happening. But yeah, it's interesting. So it makes sense that they're gonna award the Soroses,
Yeah.
because the Soroses have been awarding them in a sense.
Yeah. It's just been a transfer of wealth from low income people to the Soroses, from the Soroses to the Democratic Party. So
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting stuff, man. Very interesting stuff, man. Yeah, start a podcast. What are you waiting for,
Thanks,
man?
bro. I appreciate it.
There's a lot of people who would be willing to talk to you, and you're going to be on Timcast, you said, or you already were?
I will. Well, both. I was on there twice already. I was on the Culture Wars and then IRL. And then he made a documentary actually about my reveal on Alex Stein's show. So Tim Pool
Wow.
made a 10-minute little short mini documentary on my reveal. And then he invited me back for his show on the 27th of this month. That will also be IRL. And I'm sure there will be a couple co-guests with me as well, as there usually is. So yeah, I love Tim. He's been amazing. He was the very first person to have me on a podcast. I saw he had made, this was during my trans troll, he had made a video and my brother sent it to me and goes, "Oh my God, you're on Tim Pool." And I was like, "Who's that?" Because I wasn't at the time watching a lot of YouTubers and stuff. And he's like, "Dude, he's huge." And so I was like, "Oh." So I watched his take and he was saying I was a genius, brilliant. He thought I was dismantling woke ideology, but he couldn't say for sure. And so I reached out to him and he's like, "Dude, come on my show." And so I've been out there a couple times and he's awesome. And he's been really good to me. So yeah, big shout out to Tim Pool.
Wow. That's amazing, man. Yeah, I'm sure there's more to come, but yeah, you should definitely listen. If you're going to be on Tim Pool, right? Like even now, as we like come to an end, because we're like at 2 hours here, my wife's waiting to go to the gym. I got to take care of the baby.
My phone's at 5%. So
yeah. But you're going to be on Tim Pool, the same way that I would end this. I would be like, where could people find you? What do you got going on? I mean, if you're on Tim Pool and you announce that you have a podcast, right? And maybe you have a couple episodes up. Maybe you're just talking about it. Maybe it's a little intro episode, whatever you want to do. Or maybe you're just talking about your full experience, being being your experience as a trans woman. You know what I mean? Like people will jump over. They'll be like, okay, this guy has a podcast. This guy, like, I would say it's 100% something you should do. I mean, if you want to continue the dialogue, like you said, it's the perfect place to start, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge audience. The first time I was on was actually with Alex Stein. So me and Alex were the guests on Culture War. And so that was an awesome episode. And there was thousands of comments under the YouTube video saying, "Oh my God, Josh is a genius. This is absolutely amazing." I was still in character as a trans person the first 2 times I went on his show. So this will be the first time I am on Timcast as a man. Well, I was always a man, like all trans women, but as presenting as a man, that I am. So.
You gotta go on there as a black man. You gotta represent.
Alex, I was gonna go on Alex Stein as a black man a couple weeks ago, but I ended up not doing that. So.
Oh man, yeah, that's hilarious. But yeah, man, thank you so much for doing this. I know I was a little late, but as you get into the black race, you're gonna have to get used to that. That's what
black people time.
That's what we do. I was testing you. I'm like, if he's okay with it. I got a message after 7 minutes. I'm like, oh, I don't know. He has to work on his blackness.
Maybe I'm not black then. It's all right. I'll just put on a costume and then I become black. That's how all this works, liberal logic.
Yeah. But yeah, man, thank you so much for doing this. And it's been a great conversation and definitely eye-opening in regards to who you are. So definitely do more of it, man. Start a podcast. I'm like Joe Rogan back in the day. Joe Rogan used to tell everybody to start a podcast, and I 100% agree with the sentiment. Like, go start a podcast. See what it does. Who knows? In 2 years, all of a sudden I have 200,000 subscribers on my YouTube. That could easily happen for you. Easily.
I will definitely take that advice. I think that's the logical next step. So, dude, thank you for having me today. This was an awesome conversation. And I don't know, I just really liked it. It was good. So thank you for having me.
No problem, man. Thank you so much. You're one of the first guests as I start to
nice
transition into like having more guests on. So
awesome.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you for staying on for so long. And yeah, man. Guys, how do you say your last name? Is it Seiter?
It's cider, like apple cider.
Seiter, Josh Seiter, and your ex. What's your ex handle?
My ex is Josh_Seiter, and my Instagram is Josh_Seiter_official.
All right, and look out for him on YouTube, Spotify. If this guy starts a podcast, I'm definitely going to let people know. Just send me a link when you actually do that, and I'll for sure let people know, man.
Awesome, dude. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Thank you so much, man.
All right, take it easy, brother.
You too, man.
All right, bye.
Peace. Man, that was Josh, ladies and gentlemen. Solid guy. Very interesting conversation. I did not think it would be all of that. I didn't know what to expect with this guy. I didn't know if he'd be a little crazy, a little wild. I don't know, but he's a well-spoken dude. Definitely has his thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the world, and I hope he does start that podcast. And I will let you guys know if he does end up starting that podcast. I'll let you guys know right away. But thank you guys. If you hung in for the 2 hours with your tinfoil Speedo on this whole time, take them off because you're probably chafing. But also, thank you so much, your family. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. Helps the channel tremendously. And other than that, I'm out.